What is consciousness really? Have you ever had that strange, fleeting feeling? Maybe just as you're waking up, where you're not quite sure who or where you are. Or perhaps you've experienced the disorientation of emerging from a deep, dreamless sleep, that momentary blankness before the world snaps back into focus. Where were you in those moments? Where did your awareness, your sense of self, go? That question, that momentary glimpse into the unknown, touches upon one of the most profound mysteries we can contemplate: the nature of consciousness. It's the feeling of being alive, the subjective experience of seeing, hearing, thinking, feeling. It's the warmth of sunlight on your skin, the taste of your favorite food, the joy, the sorrow, the everything that makes up your inner world. It's so intimately familiar. It's you. And yet, it's also utterly mysterious. What is this awareness that we all take for granted? To answer that, let's look to what science, and in particular, neuroscience, has uncovered. The brain, that incredibly complex thing inside your head, is clearly super important. We know it's a giant network of billions of tiny cells called neurons, all talking to each other with electrical and chemical signals. Imagine a city at night, lights blinking, messages going everywhere, a constant buzz of activity. That's kind of like a tiny picture of what's going on in your brain. And somehow, all this activity creates you, your thoughts, your memories, your feeling of being a separate person. One cool scientific theory, called Integrated Information Theory, IIT, tries to explain what makes something conscious. IIT says it's not just about having lots of information. It's about how connected that information is. Think of it like a really tightly woven net, where every thread is linked to every other thread. The more connected, the more conscious. A simple light switch isn't very connected. It's just on or off. But the human brain, with its trillions of connections, is super connected. And so, according to IIT, it has this rich, complex consciousness. However, science isn't the only approach to understanding consciousness. Buddhism, an ancient philosophical and spiritual tradition, also offers deep insights into this matter. In Buddhism, consciousness, or vijnana, isn't seen as something the brain makes, but as a process. Vijnana is one of 5 parts, 5 skandhas, that make up what we usually call a person. But vijnana isn't separate. It doesn't exist on its own. It arises because of other things. It depends on them. Think of a flame. A flame can't exist by itself. It needs fuel, like wood and air. In the same way, vijnana happens when your senses, like your eyes, meet something in the world, like a color. The seeing of that color is the vijnana. It's not like there's a little you inside your head that's doing the seeing. The seeing itself is the consciousness. When you hear music, your ears, auditory sense, contacting sound. The awareness of that sound is vijnana. If you're not paying attention, the sound might pass you by. But when you focus, vijnana arises, and you perceive the melody, rhythm, and emotions the music carries. These 5 skandhas are your physical body, rupa, your feelings, vedana, good, bad, or neutral, how you recognize things, sanya, your habits and intentions, sankhara, and consciousness, vijnana. Your feelings when listening to that music, happy, sad, etc., influence your perception, sanya, of it. And your habits and preferences, sankhara, also affect whether you like the music or not. All these factors are intimately linked to vijnana. The Buddha, in the Samyutta Nikaya, used many examples to illustrate this. He talked about how a guitar only makes sound when you pluck the strings, or how a shadow only appears when something blocks the light. Consciousness, like the sound or the shadow, isn't a thing that exists by itself. It's something that happens because of certain conditions, and it changes when those conditions change. This idea of consciousness as dependent and always changing is central to Buddhist thought. It challenges the idea that we have a permanent, unchanging self, an I, separate from everything else. Buddhism points to how everything is connected, always flowing and changing. So we have two views, two lenses through which to view consciousness. Science. Consciousness is like a complex computer program running on the brain, a result of all that connected information. Buddhism. Consciousness is like a flame, dependent on conditions and always changing. It is not about right or wrong. It is about different perspectives. But what if consciousness isn't confined to just our brains? What if it extends further? Could the universe itself be conscious? Is the universe thinking right now? We've explored what you might call consciousness, that feeling of being aware, of experiencing the world, from both a scientific and a Buddhist perspective. But what if we zoom out? Way out? Beyond your body, beyond the earth, beyond even our solar system. What if we ask, is the universe itself, in some way, conscious? It sounds like a wild question, maybe even a little strange. But it's a question that some scientists and philosophers are taking very seriously. And surprisingly, it connects to some very deep ideas in Buddhism. Let's start with the science. There's a growing idea called panpsychism. Pan means all, and psyche means mind or soul. So, panpsychism is the idea that mind, or some basic form of consciousness, is a fundamental property, a basic characteristic, like gravity or electromagnetism, of the universe. It's not saying that rocks and trees are thinking like we do, but it suggests that even very simple things, like atoms, might have a tiny spark of experience, a rudimentary form of awareness, a very simple, basic kind of awareness, like the feeling of an insect. One of the leading thinkers in this area is philosopher David Chalmers. He argues that consciousness might be a fundamental building block of reality. He doesn't claim to know this for sure, but he suggests it's something we should consider. Why? Because it might help us solve the hard problem of consciousness. The question of why physical processes in the brain give rise to subjective experience. Your personal inner feeling of being you, at all. Now, this isn't the mainstream view in science. Most scientists still believe that consciousness is something that emerges from complex systems, like brains. But panpsychism is getting more attention, and it's making us rethink some of our basic ideas about the universe. So, what does Buddhism have to say about this? At first, it might seem like Buddhism and panpsychism are completely different. Buddhism focuses on the human experience, on ending suffering, on understanding the nature of mind. It doesn't usually talk about the consciousness of atoms or the whole universe. But if we look closer, we find some interesting connections. One of the core teachings of Buddhism is dependent origination, praticca samudpada. This is the idea that everything is interconnected, that nothing exists on its own. Everything arises in dependence on other things, like a vast, intricate web, a complex, interconnected network, like a spider's web. Imagine a network of dewdrops, each one reflecting all the others. If one drop changes, it affects all the others, because they're all connected. That's similar to how dependent origination sees the universe. Everything is linked, and a change in one thing affects everything else. This applies to mind and matter too. In Buddhism, there's no real separation between them. They arise together, interdependently. The Buddha, in the Majjhima Nikaya, used the analogy of two sheaves of reeds leaning against each other. If you remove one, the other falls. Mind and matter are like that. They support each other. Dependent origination isn't just a general idea. It's often described in detail through the 12 nidanas, a chain of cause and effect. It starts with ignorance, avijja, which leads to volitional formations, sankhara, then consciousness, vijnana, and so on, ultimately leading to suffering, dukkha. Understanding this chain, Buddhists believe, is key to breaking the cycle of suffering. Each link depends on the one before it, and leads to the one after it, like a complex, interconnected chain reaction. Now, here's the connection. If everything is interconnected, if mind and matter aren't fundamentally separate, then it's not such a big leap to consider a kind of universal interconnectedness of awareness. Buddhism doesn't say the universe is a giant brain that's thinking thoughts, but it does suggest a deeply interconnected web of being, where awareness isn't limited to individual beings like you and me. Think of it like this. Panpsychism suggests consciousness is fundamental, like gravity. Buddhism suggests a universal interconnectedness, where awareness isn't limited to individuals, but is more like a field in which individual consciousnesses arise. It's not that the universe is thinking in the way you are thinking. It's more like the universe is a vast field of potential awareness, a field in which individual consciousnesses, like yours and mine, arise and fade away. So if the universe is indeed a vast web of interconnected awareness, what does that mean for our place in it? Emptiness and the cosmic mind. We've been exploring the idea of a universe possibly imbued with some form of awareness, drawing parallels between modern science and ancient Buddhist wisdom. Now, let's turn to a concept that might, at first, seem to challenge everything we've discussed: emptiness. In Buddhism, this is known as shunyata, and it's a concept that can be both challenging and deeply insightful. It's not about nothingness, but about a different way of understanding everything. Core question is this: if everything is interconnected, if everything depends on everything else, then what's fundamentally real? If there's no independent, self-existing thing, how can anything, including consciousness, even exist? This is where the profound teaching of shunyata comes in. Emptiness, in the Buddhist context, doesn't mean that nothing exists. It means that nothing exists independently, in and of itself. Everything is empty of inherent existence. Everything is interconnected and interdependent, arising from a web of causes and conditions. The Heart Sutra, a key text in Mahayana Buddhism, makes this powerful statement. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. This isn't a riddle. It's a profound insight into the nature of reality. It means that the things we usually perceive as solid and separate, tables, chairs, even our own bodies, are actually processes, events, constantly arising and passing away. They're not fixed things, but dynamic patterns of energy, like the ever-changing patterns of clouds in the sky, or the swirling patterns in a flowing river. Think of a wave in the ocean. The wave seems to be a separate thing, rising and falling, but it's not truly separate from the ocean. It is the ocean, taking a particular shape for a moment. The wave is empty of its own independent existence. It depends entirely on the water, the wind, and many other factors. In the same way, everything we perceive is empty of an inherent, separate self-nature. So how does this connect to consciousness? If everything is empty of inherent existence, then consciousness itself must also be empty. Consciousness isn't a thing inside you, a separate entity that has thoughts and feelings. It's a process, a dynamic arising, dependent on conditions, just like everything else. It's like the reflection in a mirror. The reflection is real, but it has no independent existence. It depends entirely on the mirror and the object being reflected. Now, let's consider a parallel from the world of science. Quantum physics. At the subatomic level, the solid, predictable world we're used to breaks down. Particles aren't solid things, but exist in a state of probability, more like waves of potential than tiny marbles. They don't even have definite properties until they're observed. It's as if the universe, at its most fundamental level, is more like a web of relationships than a collection of separate, independent objects. This resonates deeply with the Buddhist concept of emptiness. Both quantum physics and shunyata challenge the idea of a world made up of separate, solid things. Instead, they point to a reality that's fundamentally interconnected, a dynamic web of relationships where everything is constantly in flux, arising and passing away. The universe, seen this way, isn't a collection of separate objects, but a dynamic, interconnected whole. It's more like a hologram, where each part contains information about the whole, than a machine made of separate, independent parts. So, if both form, the physical world, and consciousness, are empty, interdependent, and constantly changing, what does this suggest about the possibility of a cosmic mind? It suggests that if there is a universal awareness, it's not a separate thing from the universe itself. It's not a giant brain somewhere out there. It's more likely the interconnectedness itself, the dynamic flowing nature of reality. Buddhism. Consciousness is like an echo, real, but without an independent source. It's the resonance of interconnectedness. Quantum physics. The universe is like a hologram. Everything is interconnected, and the whole is present in every part. If consciousness is like an echo, and the universe is like a hologram, could the universe itself be humming with awareness, not as a separate entity, but as the very fabric of its interconnected being? And if the universe is indeed this vibrant, interconnected dance of emptiness and form, what does it mean to be a part of it all? What if the universe is conscious? We've journeyed from the familiar feeling of our own awareness to the vastness of the cosmos, exploring the possibility of a universe imbued with consciousness. We've considered the scientific perspective of panpsychism and the profound Buddhist teachings on emptiness and dependent origination. Now, let's ask the big question. What if it's true? What if the universe is, in some sense, conscious? What would that mean for us? The implications are profound, touching on our spiritual lives, our understanding of science, and even our everyday experiences. From a Buddhist perspective, realizing the interconnectedness of all things is a key step on the path to enlightenment. It's about seeing through the illusion of a separate, independent self, the ego, and recognizing that we are part of a much larger whole. If consciousness is not limited to individual beings, but is a fundamental aspect of the universe, this sense of interconnectedness deepens even further. It's no longer just me and you, but a single flowing field of awareness in which we all participate. This realization, according to Buddhist teachings, naturally leads to greater compassion and wisdom. Because we see that we are not fundamentally separate from others, that our joys and sorrows are intertwined. The suffering of another being becomes, in a very real sense, our own suffering. This understanding fosters a natural empathy, a spontaneous desire to alleviate suffering and promote well-being, not just for ourselves, but for all beings. The fear of death, too, might be lessened, as death is seen not as the end of us, but as a transformation within the larger flow of consciousness. It's like a wave returning to the ocean. The wave's form changes, but the water remains. But what about the scientific and philosophical implications? If the universe is conscious, does that mean it has intentions? Does it care about what happens? These are questions that we can't answer definitively. Panpsychism, as a scientific theory, doesn't necessarily imply a purposeful universe. It simply suggests that consciousness is a fundamental property, not something that emerges only in complex brains. However, the very idea of a conscious universe challenges our traditional, materialistic worldview, where consciousness is seen as a mere byproduct of physical processes. It opens up new avenues of inquiry, new ways of thinking about the relationship between mind and matter, between the subjective and the objective. And what about our everyday lives? How might this understanding affect the way we live? Perhaps it would lead to a greater sense of reverence for the natural world, a deeper appreciation for the interconnectedness of all life. Perhaps it would encourage us to cultivate mindfulness, to pay closer attention to the present moment, recognizing that each moment is an opportunity to participate in the unfolding of the universe's awareness. It might also change how we approach our own inner experiences. If consciousness is not limited to our individual brains, then perhaps our thoughts, feelings, and intuitions are not just ours, but are part of a larger field of awareness. This doesn't mean we're not responsible for our actions, but it might encourage us to be more open to the wisdom that arises from beyond our limited, ego-centered perspective. Ultimately, the question of whether the universe is conscious remains open. But the very act of considering this possibility can be transformative. It can expand our understanding of ourselves, our place in the cosmos, and the nature of reality itself. If consciousness is the universe experiencing itself, then every moment, every breath, every thought is the universe waking up to itself through you. And that, perhaps, is the most profound realization of all. These are questions that invite us to continue exploring, to continue questioning, and to continue deepening our understanding of ourselves and the universe we inhabit.